Hello and welcome back to another episode of the For the Property Investor podcast. And we're here with Nick Bendel with the weekly news. Hello, Nick.
Hello, Owen.
Hello,
Great
Owen.
to see you.
Great to see you again. It feels like it's been weeks and weeks and weeks.
Well, it feels like that, and yet
like that,
it's been only 1 week since episode, so go figure.
Yes. So there you go. It's has anything been anything exciting happened in your work week in the past week?
Well, yes, lots of exciting things. How difficult it is to narrow it down to just one. I own a copywriting agency called Hunter and Scribe. We write content for a lot of mortgage brokers, and we got a lovely 5-star Google review from one of our broker clients. Nick has been a consistent extension of our team over the last few years. The quality of writing is always high. He is adaptable to our changing briefs, and he turns around work in short timeframes. Would highly recommend.
Very good. Well done. Congratulations.
Thank you so much. It was very nice to get those generous words. What's been happening with you and your property management business, Leafield?
Well, nothing as exciting as what happens in your life, but it's just boring property management stuff. We're just head down, working away. We had a record month of leasing. We've getting more properties on, a lot more in the Hunter Valley region, which I'm sure I've spoken about before. We haven't had so much leasing in Sydney, but we've had a resurgence come back. So we got a few more listings on in the Sydney market, so looking to get them done. And we've got our biggest listing for lease. It's actually in the Gold Coast. So that's on the market at the moment. So looking forward to getting that one leased. So
when you say biggest, you mean it's the largest home?
it probably is one of the largest homes, but also dollar-wise as well. In terms of weekly rent. So it's doesn't come up too often, so but usually gets snapped up fairly quickly. So even in those bigger price points, there's good demand, but that's because there's not much supply in those price points. So it's there's definitely people out there looking in higher price points for lease. There you go. But
well, I love the Gold Coast, and I'm a Sydney boy, but I will be going to the Gold Coast next month for the FBAA Mortgage Broking Conference. So maybe I'll pop by this property of yours while I'm there.
There you go. Well, that's if it's still available and vacant. You might be having to knock on the door, and the new tenants will have to let you through.
I'm sure they will.
I'm sure that they would have heard of you and knew that you were coming.
Yeah, I mean, they're probably subscribers to the podcast.
Of course, everyone is.
Exactly.
Yes. Well, that's our exciting weeks. What's happening in the news lately, Nick?
Oh, we've got some interesting stories today. Our first one is Westpac upgrades outlook as market tightens. Westpac has increased its property price forecast, predicting the national median price to increase by 6% this year and 9% next year. Westpac gave several reasons for increasing a forecast it made earlier this year. One of those reasons is interest rate cuts have lifted sentiment. Another is the number of homes for sale has declined. And another reason is, perhaps surprisingly, there's been an increase in the number of cash buyers in the market. The city-by-city forecasts that Westpac gave are Sydney, 5% price growth this year and 8% next year. Melbourne, 4% this year, 10% next year. Brisbane, 7% and 8%. Perth, 8% and 8%. Adelaide, 5% and 6%, and Hobart, 3% this year and 4% next year. So, Owen, Westpac has forecast national growth of 6% this year and 9% next year, suggesting the market is going to strengthen in the coming months. Does that surprise you?
No, not at all. We've got a number of factors. The reason why it's we've got a lower interest rate environment than we've had in the last 12, 18 months. And then, of course, we've got the new federal government first home buyer scheme. Well, it's the scheme itself isn't new, but the new extended benefits that's been opened up to unlimited places, and also the qualifying criteria has definitely widened in terms of its scope. So I think both of those factors will see a lot more activity in the coming months, and definitely into the new year.
Now, speaking of the new year, of all the capital cities next year, Melbourne is predicted to be the best performing capital city. Does that seem likely to you?
Well, I wouldn't be surprised if it does, and likely is probably true. There is a lot of activity happening in Melbourne right now, and it's likely to continue. And speaking to a lot of buyers agents on the ground that are buying for investors, especially, they're very, very active in the greater Melbourne market, but still very picky about what they're buying and where they're buying.
And one of the reasons Westpac expects prices to keep rising nationally is due to a shortage of stock. What do you think is driving this reduction in listing activity?
Oh, there's number of reasons, but probably the number one that the property market has been so active the last number of years. And if people were going to sell, they might have already sold. And then where are they going to buy? Yes, there'll always be people who are wanting to buy and sell, but a lot of people are looking at what they can get bang for their buck, and it's just like, well, if we sell, we're going to have to pay more for something else. It's
But
like, so is it really worthwhile going through the hassle and the process?
now
And
the reason I'm laughing, I remember in 2022 and 2023 when prices were falling and stock levels were low, and commentators were saying the reason stock levels are low is people don't want to sell while prices are falling. They want to wait until prices start rising again. But now when prices are rising, people don't want to still sell when prices are rising either. Apparently,
yeah,
they
well,
want to wait till prices are falling.
yeah, well, I mean, we've seen huge volumes in the last few years of properties being sold. So it's and it is a bit like that, where yeah, people don't want to sell because prices are falling, but also it's that angst of, well, if we sell now, it's just like, what are we going to buy? And like, is it really worthwhile? So it's and also, do they hold on longer to get more money?
Well, last month I was in Melbourne and I had coffee with someone who is planning to sell his home, I think in November. He and his family are going to spend 1 year traveling around Australia. And I thought that sounds great, and I wished him all the best. But I remember thinking, oh, it seems like Melbourne is really gathering momentum. And if you sell and then you try to buy back in a year's time, who knows what prices are going to be like. So we've
Yeah.
got at least one person who's going to put their property on the market. And according to Westpac, by the time he tries to buy again, prices will be 10% higher.
Mm. And I think there would be a number of investors who are looking at maybe cashing in, maybe not in Melbourne quite yet, but yeah, investors, especially in the Brisbane market. We've seen a few people in and across other markets in Queensland that have had tremendous growth in the last number of years, and they're going, "Yep, we bought this property 15 years ago, and we've had tremendous growth in the last 5 years, so let's cash in on that." So yeah, it's there will be stock coming onto the market, but it's just depends on where you're looking as to whether there'll be that supply in that market.
When I buy investment properties, I promised myself that I'll never ever sell them. And so maybe that's the reason for the undersupply of properties.
Well, it's one reason, but there could be a reason in the future why you will want to, and so it's just about timing. And there's lots of people that hold on to their properties long term, which if they're doing it for investment, they should be.
Mm.
But let's remember that the majority of the market are owner occupiers, buying and selling, upgrading or downgrading, and either within their same market or maybe moving. But yeah, the majority of people who are uh, in the market are there as owner occupiers, either selling to downgrade or upgrade.
Well, this discussion about supply leads on nicely to our second story, which is population growth slows for sixth successive quarter. Australia's population grew by 1.56% in the year to March. By way of comparison, the average annual growth rate this century has been 1.49%. Population growth has now slowed for 6 successive quarters after reaching 2.42% in December 2023. The national population hit 27.5 million at the end of March after growing by 423,000 over the previous 12 months, with 25% of that being due to natural increase and 75% due to immigration. So, Owen, our population is growing at 1.56% per year compared to the long-term average of 1.49%. So what do you think about that 1.56% growth rate? Do you think that's too low, too high, or about right?
Um, well, it depends whether you're talking about in the long term or in the short term or the medium term.
Mm.
It's yeah, I don't want to get attacked in the comments from people calling me names, because there's been a lot of activity out in the streets in the last number of weeks of people, with placards and banners and a lot of name calling going on. But let's just stick to some facts and figures. In the long term, 1.56% compared to the long-term average of 1.49%. It's not that big a difference. It's not too big a deal. But in the short term, when we're talking about the property market and the issues we've got there, where we've got a lot of demand already and not enough supply of properties. If we're wanting to alleviate the issues of rents being pushed up and house prices as well being pushed up, then we need to alleviate that in the short term with less demand. And the only way to do that is to uh, lessen the amount of people that will be uh, in demand of housing. So in the short term, it's probably a good idea to reduce the amount of immigration, not stop it, not reduce it, and certainly not caring about where in the world they're coming from. We just want the right number of people to come into the country for skilled migration to be able to help build more housing. But we probably need a lower number of people. So yes, that's my politically correct answer to that question.
Well, very diplomatic of you. So I note your point about how in the short term, at least, there should be a link between the number of people admitted to the country and our capacity to house them. What about the long term, though? For many years, there's been a debate about whether we should have a big Australia with stronger population growth and a larger population, or a small Australia with the opposite of that. Are you a big Australia or a small Australia man?
Well, I definitely think long term we need to grow our population. We can certainly hold a bigger population, and if we want to be able to compete on the world scale economically, then yes, we need to be able to grow economically, and to be able to do that, we need a bigger population. Unfortunately, our natural birth rate is not keeping up with that. So it will be fully dependent on immigration. And but I think we do need to be choosy about who is immigrating into our country in terms of providing the right skills to be able to help our economy grow and prosper into the future, and so that we're building the economy where people can look after themselves. It's we want a big Australia, but with small government.
Okay, I like the way you juxtapose those two things. I believe that where the average woman is having 1.5 babies at the moment, and the replacement rate is 2.1. So if on average a woman gives birth to 2.1 children, then the population remains flat, and anything under that, which is what we have now, the population declines. So as you correctly pointed out, the reason our population is growing is due to immigration. I'm wondering, if you were Prime Minister, and I hope Anthony Albanese doesn't feel threatened by this question, but if you were Prime Minister, what changes, Owen, would you make to our population and immigration policies?
Well, I don't think Mr. Albanese listens to many other people other than himself. But it's if he was to actually listen to some common sense, what changes would I make? Well, firstly, in the short term, I think we should reduce the number of people coming in, and we should focus the people who are coming in on the skilled migrants that we need to be able to help grow the country, grow the housing supply, so that we can then start bringing in as many people as we want. Let's blow this thing up and get the population growing long term. But in the short term, we need to maybe not take a step backwards, but just take some smaller steps forwards so that we can take some bigger strides in the future.
I know that Anthony Albanese is a subscriber to this podcast, and yet you say quite nasty things about him every episode. So I think he might stop subscribing if you keep talking that way.
Oh, well, it's well, yeah, I'd like some feedback from him. So it's happy to have him on, and we can nut it out. But he might have to listen to some common sense. But that's all right.
Okay, well, for our final story, you might get to give the Prime Minister some more feedback. Our
Yeah.
final story is unemployment holds steady despite weak economy. Australia's unemployment rate stayed flat at 4.2% in August, according to the Australian Bureau of Statistics, but there are signs that the labour market is softening. The number of people in work in August fell by about 5,000, while the number of hours worked fell by 0.4%. Nevertheless, the unemployment rate held steady because fewer people were actively looking for work, and someone is counted as unemployed only if they're actually trying to find a job. Australian Industry Group, the National Employees Association, said the economy is in a strange place. We have, quote, the strongest labour market in decades at the same time as the weakest economy in decades. Why, Owen, I hear you ask? Well, again, this is another quote from Australian Industry Group. Government spending has artificially propped up the labour market since the pandemic. The private sector labour market has weakened materially with the economy, but government-funded jobs have surged to conceal the problem. Now, Owen, do we as a nation have to choose between higher government spending and lower unemployment on the one hand, or lower spending and higher unemployment on the other? Do we have to make that choice?
I think if we in the long term want to have a healthy country and healthy economy, I think we maybe need to make that choice. It's when you look at half the population is in some way receiving an income from the government, whether it's being employed in a government role, government job, or receiving welfare of some type. That's a bit of a worry. Like, I agree that we need a safety net in this country with social security, but At the moment, it seems like we've built a retaining wall, and it's what happens when we run out of materials to keep building that retaining wall? What happens to our economy? What happens to to our country socially? It's so that's a real concern long term when the whole population or half the population literally is reliant in some way on a government income. And that's not to say the onflow effects of the government spending. So there might be government spending on infrastructure projects and so on, which needs to happen and needs to be funded. But when the government is spending money on that, as well as propping up the economy with government-funded jobs and social security, then how long can that be sustained? And the problem is when we need to reduce that, pare it back, take it away, who's going to be happy about that?
Yes, I see your point. I do think there's too much government spending. I do think there's too much welfare, but I actually, in all seriousness, I don't blame your good friend Anthony Albanese. Do you know who I blame for this?
Who's that?
I blame us, the voters. We, anytime there's some sort of problem, we demand that the government solve it for us, and we keep incentivizing governments to spend more money and give us more things because when they promise us more spending and more things, we vote them in. And if we think they're going to take things away from us, we vote them out.
Yep, you're 100% correct. And I think part of the problem is no matter who you vote for, you're going to get a politician.
Well, yes, that's true. That's true.
Yes. So no matter which side of Parliament you're voting for, you're always going to get a politician, and unfortunately, they all know what the formula is to get the votes. So yes, at the end of the day, it falls back to us as the electorate making that decision, and if we vote the way that we have in recent times, we're going to have to pay the consequences down the track.
The dark side of democracy sausage.
That's correct.
Indeed, that would be a good headline. Now, I'm wondering, Owen, we've been talking about government spending. Spending aside, what could the government do to stimulate the economy and support the private sector to create more jobs?
Instead of maybe spending money on things that will buy them votes, as we were talking about, it's maybe cutting taxes to make it easier for businesses to invest, either invest in infrastructure, capital expenditure, and invest in jobs. And uh, if that was available, now it's not the only answer, but it's one alternative to what seems to be the common answer. Then it provides an alternative to be able to provide jobs for people to actually look after themselves instead of the government having to look after them.
I like the idea of paying less taxes, both as an individual and as a business owner, but I must say I'm a bit nervous these days when someone proposes lower taxes because I think to myself, well, we're already running deficits year after year after year, and won't that just increase the deficits? Do we not have to return to surplus before we can start thinking about cutting taxes?
Well, true, but that's where it's a combination of cutting expenditure as well as not just cutting any taxes, but cutting the right type of taxes. And it might be a matter of more reform of the tax system, which has been talked a lot about in recent times, but there doesn't seem to be much action because all of the decisions that should be made aren't going to help buy those votes, as we were talking about before. So yes, they'll be all unpopular decisions. It's tax reform is something that needs to happen. So yeah, getting rid of things like payroll tax. It's the most stupid tax yeah, in the universe. Yeah, why would we tax a business for employing more people? It's we should be providing incentives for them to employ more people. But it's a state-based tax, if anyone doesn't know that, and it's really and because states in Australia they can't charge an income tax. It's only federal government can do that under the Constitution. It's the only way that state governments can charge some kind of an income tax, but they get around it by calling it a payroll tax, and it's a tax on businesses that employ more people. So yes, it's just another dumb tax, bit like stamp duty. Yeah, we've talked about that at length on this podcast between the two of us, talking about stamp duty and land tax and the whole tax reform around property taxes. So there's a lot of taxes there that states charge because they can, because they always have, but they're not exactly good taxes that really do anything for us. They're just taxes because they can. So yes, maybe some reforms there to be able to free up the economy a bit more, and especially the housing market and businesses. Let's help businesses do things to grow themselves instead of us as an economy having to rely on the government all the time to save us.
Well, you've given the Prime Minister and the Premiers a lot to think about.
Thank you, Nick. I try.
Well, don't thank me. They should thank you.
Yes, they should.
And on that note, thank you as always for your wonderful insights, Owen. Great to chat, and I look forward to seeing you next week.
My pleasure, Nick, and looking forward to seeing you next week as well. We'll talk then.